And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. An ordained minister is a member of clergy who has been set apart to perform religious ceremonies and rites. The process of becoming ordained varies by denomination and religion. On today's Open Connection, we're open our archives to bring you this story from 2000.
This is one of the first places Brian Allen Richards visited when he came to the Northwest 10 months ago. He got off to a bad start at the Mountain View Pentecostal Church, and things didn't get any better from there.
I thought he was an interesting character, but that was fine, and he came and sat in our church. And I didn't really think a whole lot of it. Maybe his looks were a little striking, but that was not a big deal. But things started to go a little funny very, very quickly after that, and I started to have some doubts, and some things started to happen.
Because everyone here knew him as Richards, that's how I'll address him in this story, even though in reality he's Richard Brian Menard, wanted in the U.S. on fraud and assault charges. One of the many deceptions he practiced here was to tell anyone who would listen that he was a preacher.
It was apparent that what he was claiming to be wasn't really what was happening. In fact, he had told me that he was an ordained minister, and so he wasn't acting like it. One of the things he was doing was being inappropriate with females.
While Richards was turning off people at the church, he started a religious radio show called the Christian Power Hour, heard across the Northwest. But he also kept busy raising suspicions and making enemies throughout the region with his special brand of clamorous pomposity.
He was pretty much a character. Right off the start, just very loud-mouthed and full of it. And I don't know how to say that politely, but yeah.
He was a large guy, and I think some people might have felt he was a little threatening because he was quite loud, and he definitely felt comfortable in that atmosphere. And because of his size and his nature, I think he might have scared a few people.
In retrospect, I know that he obviously gave me his an alias, not his real name, so I'm not really sure what part of anything that he's told me is the truth or not. So now.
Meanwhile, back at the church, Richard's behavior so offended women there, Pastor Don Richmond asked him to stop coming to the church altogether, and then he went even further.
I admit I told him that I am not trying to shut you down, Brian. I am determined to shut you down, because I knew he was a fake, and he was rolling through the valley and through the Northwest and persuading people otherwise.
Richard's attempts with other women proved equally unsuccessful, with one of them even calling RCMP to get him to stop harassing her. Richard's tall tales had an effect on a lot of people throughout the Northwest, but maybe none more so than the village of Grand Isle, which relies heavily on tourism.
Good afternoon, Grand Isle Resort.
When you first saw Brian Richards and you first heard him talking, what did you think of the guy?
Well, I thought, well, another one of those guys with grand ideas, another person that's going to come in and try and change the world and eventually get a burnout like everybody else did.
Pedersen took care of Richards and some American clients on 3 occasions, supplying guiding and sightseeing services as well as first-class meals. Richards paid for everybody on the first trip with a check that surprisingly wasn't made of rubber.
Well, the second time he paid again. It took a little longer to be paid, but he did pay, and it was good again, which was surprising, but that's the way it went.
And then the third time?
Well, the third time, kept promising to pay, and eventually time went by and payment was never received. So of course, we got a little concerned about that.
There are several other stories of non-payment and promises unkept by Richards in Grand Isle, but some people there believe it's possible the struggling tourist village may have been a little too eager to improve its own economy by dealing with a guy like this.
He had good ideas when he came, and he tried to sell everybody on it and wanted everybody to jump on the bandwagon and help him, And we all did, because we want to see, our community prosper, because we have beautiful surroundings. We have everything to offer to the outdoorsmen, the sportsmen, the tourism. But basically, it turned out to be that he was just another one of those basic scam artist kind of person.
Grand Isle, we're really pushing tourism here, and we need tourism bad. And this guy appeared to have connections to some big American-type money. He could get Americans up here, which is what we all want. And just like you're playing the stock market, if you play the pennies, stock, something like that, someday they connect and you get rich off them. A lot of times they don't. So
Richards had some kind of a contract with one of the resort owners to promote the place and try selling timeshares. That owner from Vancouver quickly tired of Richards' shady business practices and nullified the contract. Unbelievably, Richards kept right on telling people he worked for the resort.
He was trying to get me involved with some kind of timeshare thing in Grand Isle, that he owns some kind of timeshare thing in internet business or something along that line.
Yeah. He doesn't own that timeshare thing. In fact, he wasn't even supposed to be working for them. He had no authorization, yet he was trying to sell them. What do you think about that?
Oh, well, I'm just glad I got my money for my Jeep.
Richards' years of lies, fraud, and scams came to a crashing halt in Smithers last month. A private investigator hired by a California man Richards ripped off for at least $35,000 tipped off RCMP that the con man was in the country illegally. He was arrested, his fingerprints were sent to the FBI, and when word came back that he was a wanted man in Idaho, Richards was back in the States in no time, but not before he bilked Northwest residents out of tens of thousands of dollars.
Another woman who was involved in the business in town came in this morning and said that she is out $1,500. And I haven't been told personally, but I have been told by the private investigator that a person in Grand Isle had a check for $4,000 bounce. And, you know, those are the ones that I know of just off the top of my head. I'm sure there are others.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Eating disorders are serious illnesses marked by severe disturbances in a person's eating behaviors. Although people may be concerned about their height, weight, or appearance on occasion, some become fixated or obsessed with weight loss, body weight, or shape, or controlling their food intake. Let us return to the archives with Angela Hanley.
Today, this is perfectly normal for Angela Hanley. She can enjoy a glass of juice without agonizing over it and obsessing about calories. But it wasn't always like that. She says her weight and food became an issue when she was about 13. That's when doctors first became concerned, but things didn't really come to a head until years later.
It wasn't until I was probably 21 or 22, I got really sick. And that's when the diagnosis actually came that I had anorexia nervosa. I was emaciated. I was so skinny. I was so weak. I was in a, I starved my body. My brain was starved. I just couldn't function. So I ended up being in the hospital for 5.5 to 6 weeks. And I had to learn to walk again because I was so weak that I had no muscles left. It was eating away at my muscles.
That particular bout lasted about 6 weeks, but Angela says she never really recovered after that, and before long, she hit rock bottom again.
Would be fine for a couple months, and then I would get really bad again. When my grandmother passed away about 4 years ago, that was really bad for me. That just it was a trigger for me, and I was really, really ill for months.
At that point, Angela was in outpatient care. She developed heart problems and grew a very fine down on her back, a symptom not uncommon in anorexics. Still, though, when she looked in the mirror, she wasn't able to see the horribly skinny person she'd become.
What I saw was maybe not obese, but what I saw was I didn't like the way I looked. I saw bumps here, I saw bumps there, I jiggled. When it was clear to everybody else, doctors, family, friends, that I was emaciated. But to me, it was just, if I could just lose a little bit more right here, or look at my arms are jiggling, if I could just work out. But the problem was I was so skinny, and I was so weak and so sick that I didn't have the energy to work out.
And it's that distorted view of reality that all anorexics have in common. It's not just an eating disorder, Angela says, but a disease of the self-esteem.
We think we're not worthy. We think we don't deserve happiness. We never see in ourselves, like a lot of people with eating disorders, other people view them as compassionate, as intelligent, as kind. But people with eating disorders like me, we can't see that beauty within ourselves. We just don't see it. It's like that, you know, you go back when you're a kid to the fairy tale, mirror, mirror on the wall. And it is a fairy tale, especially to people with eating disorders, because when we look in that mirror, we see a myth, we see a fairy tale, we see this big person, or we see bumps, or we see jiggles, where everybody else sees somebody who's really not well.
There are a lot of reasons an eating disorder develops, and certainly no simple answer to the question of why someone would voluntarily starve themselves.
It's so many factors. Like, one would say there's societal factors, there's family factors, and there's individual factors, and then often an event that happens to sort of, with all of those factors, promote somebody going on to actually have an eating disorder.
Statistics show that 95% of women have issues around food, and anorexia is just one disorder that Terrace dietitian Flo Shepherd sees in her line of work. Bulimia is the other. Where anorexics don't eat, bulimics are the opposite. They binge uncontrollably and then try to get rid of the food through any means possible. That can mean self-induced vomiting or using laxatives. Angela says she's also familiar with the extreme. For her, it was an obsession with cellulite.
I remember being 13, 14 years old, and I was sitting on the bed, and I squeezed my legs together, and I could see this little ripple. And I thought, oh my God, I got cellulite. Look at that, I got this stuff. I got to get rid of it. I even went and took money from my little brother's piggy bank so I could have enough money to go and buy a book on how to get rid of cellulite.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Flo has worked for Northern BC for over 20 years in a variety of roles. Currently, she's Chief Population Health Dietitian and Team Lead for Population Health Nutrition Team. She takes realistic, supportive, and non-judgmental approach to healthy eating in recognition there are many things that influence how we care for ourselves. Let us return the archives with Flo Shepherd.
Recovering from anorexia isn't easy. Sufferers can't just get up one morning and decide they're going to eat. It's a long, involved process requiring a massive support network.
As a nutritionist or as a dietitian, we'd be looking at sort of helping to normalize people's attitudes around food. I mean, eating disorders are not really about food. They're more about control and more about issues around not being happy with one's life. But food gets tied into that. Often we're looking at people that apparently have a lot of information about nutrition and a lot of phobias about food. So it's sort of retraining them to enjoy food for nurturing their body, and then looking at sort of stabilizing eating habits.
Recovery is establishing a relationship with yourself and figuring out what all the hurts are about, because really eating disorders is not about the food, it's not about the weight. It really is a disease of our self-esteem, you know, and how we cope, and you learn new coping strategies.
Angela says she was fortunate to have a lot of support in her recovery. Her parents and her husband were all involved every step of the way. And at times, the recovery required hospitalization. At Mills Memorial Hospital in Terrace, one part of social worker Mickey Braid's job involves counseling those with eating disorders.
Well, it's a really tough thing to deal with, and particularly before, when we had very few resources in the community. Part of the problem is people are in the hospital for such a short time, and then they need to be treated as outpatients, and there wasn't a whole lot out there for them.
Fortunately, that's changing though, and support networks are being built. There are a couple of groups in Terrace. One, made up primarily of professionals and some lay people, concentrates on furthering education and promoting awareness. The other is a support group of sufferers and survivors that meets every Thursday night at the Family Place in Terrace.
There's a real need for a safe place for people to gather, to be able to explore their feelings, to find other people that have struggled with some of the same things that they have struggled with. I remember one person saying, "Wow, I didn't know anyone else felt like this." So it's sort of identifying and validating feelings.
Angela's a part of that group, and she enjoys her time there. It is all women who meet, and while eating disorders don't limit themselves to females alone, that is who are most often the victims.
One might say we're seeing greater and greater rates of eating disorders, and it's because if you think about your own mother, we've gone through a generation where most of us have a history of our mothers being on diets and being dissatisfied with their bodies, whereas if we had mothers that were born in the 30s, chances are not. So that we're seeing it's more and more progressively eking into our diet.
As well, women are often media targets. Shepard says the media show women who are 25% thinner than average. It's not uncommon to see rail thin models who are 5'10" and weigh just 114 pounds and wear a size 4 or 6. What's more realistic, Shepard says, is a woman who's 5'4", 142 pounds, and is a size 12 to 14. Nikki Braid agrees with that assessment, and she says people are fascinated with eating disorders.
We see it on TV quite often. We're bombarded with images of Barbie doll type figures from the time we're born. Most of us just, that's not a reality for most of us. So it's something that we think about, and people are interested in finding out how they can feel good about themselves and not have to have a Barbie doll figure.
Angela feels good about herself. She says now when she looks in the mirror, she sees health. She eats 5 or 6 small meals a day, and when something perhaps goes wrong and she starts to have self-doubt, she now has the coping mechanisms in place to deal with that.
If I get those messages in my mind like, ooh, you got a couple jiggles there, I'll take that and I'll internalize it, say, what's going on? I'll even kind of look in the mirror sometimes and say, what's going on? What does this mean?
Angela says for those with eating disorders, it seems like the light at the end of their tunnel is losing as much weight as they can, when in reality, the true light comes from recovery.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Discussions around historical influences of Taekwondo have been controversial, with 2 main schools of thought, traditionalism and revisionism. Traditionalism holds that the origins of Taekwondo are indigenous, while revisionism, the prevailing theory, argues that Taekwondo is rooted in karate. In this final segment of Open Connection, let us return to the archives with Ian Otten.
Kitimat's Champion Taekwondo Club started back in 1979. Over the years, it's expanded to include 2 youth and 1 adult class. There are about 50 in all in the club, with almost as many females as males. The group is taught by 2 main instructors and 3 assistants, and they all volunteer their time.
We don't make any money off of it. The money that we get from our students for their membership fees goes back into the club. And so what we do with that is if we need heavy bags or chest protectors, gloves, shin pads, we use our money in the bank for that. Uniforms are relatively cheap. Your testing, like say for your first belt, like a yellow belt, that'll cost you $40 for the testing, and that's for the belt and for the certificate.
One of the most challenging parts for the instructors is to keep the attention of the students. Practices are 3 times a week.
When you're with the kids for so many years and you all know each other, you're almost like a big family, and it's a little tough to be hard on the discipline, but it still gets done. They're doing pretty good at their push-ups and sit-ups.
For the kids, it's no laughing matter. While they respect their instructors, they know all too well when they step out of line, consequences follow.
They're nice, but they get hard. Like, they work us hard. They're basically nice. They let us play games when we're really good, but they're like make us listen, and we're not allowed to talk or anything.
They're nice. They're nice to us. But if you like talk a lot and everything, like in kicks, if you're doing them sloppily and you're not really trying to do anything, they'll give you push-ups. Or if you're talking all the time, when somebody's doing patterns and you make people laugh all the time, you'll either get kicked, you'll either have to leave the room here, or you'll have to do push-ups.
In the past, members from the club have competed at the national level, but for the most part, this club goes up against others in the area. Everyone gets tested twice a year, and it gives them an opportunity to move up and gain a different color belt. Right now, Kitimat's club is also preparing to host their annual tournament in May, and they hope it's as successful as last year.
Probably just over 100 competitors, and that makes for a pretty exciting day. You know, full day of Pumse, which is patterns that the kids and adults get tested on their patterns, how good they are with their power and technique, and that's a bronze, silver, and gold situation.
Daryl Douglas was the man who started Kitimat's club. However, about 2 years ago, he suffered a work-related accident, and he hasn't been officially involved with the club since, but he still enjoys being a regular visitor.
I'd like to come down, try to get down once in a while to see the students, because most of the students that are here, I taught them before my accident, so I come down to see how they're doing and stuff like that. So.
Douglas likes what he sees in the club, and now he's thinking of returning. He wants to get back teaching the sport he loves most, even if it's only part-time.
So I can take one night a week and come down and do some of the students to see how they're doing, and what they're doing wrong, I can adjust it for them and tell them the way it is. It's a big world out there, lots of Taekwondo schools. So when they go to another school in Vancouver or wherever they move to, at least they'll have a good indication how they're going to be competing against other students.
Daryl's been at this for a long time. He's taught me a lot, and he still knows a lot. What his experience and knowledge is pretty hard to do without.
At this session, one of the highlights featured a match between two black belts. One was a student that arrived in Kitimat last July from Montreal, and the other was a Korean exchange student. They went toe-to-toe in this match. It was a great battle, but because it was only practice, no winner was declared, but it left everyone satisfied. And with Taekwondo featured this summer at the Olympics in Sydney, Australia, it makes you wonder, someday you just might see a representative from this Kitimat club on the world stage.
The first game of the new Northwest High School Rugby League saw Terrace's Caledonia beat the combined Prince Rupert Charles Hayes Senior Secondary team 46-0. It was a learning game for many of the players, including about 6 females on the Rupert side. Cal had a completely male lineup.
We had a couple girls out coming out to practice. Didn't make it for today's game, but we had 2 or 3 come out, and we're encouraging more. The guys have no problem with it. I think it's the 90s, the latter 90s now. So, no, I think it's just perfectly fine, and you know, the basic rules of common conduct, courtesy apply, and away you go.
It went pretty good, except they got a lot more points less because they're so much bigger. But it was a pretty good first game because we found out a lot about how we were going to play and what we can do to improve.
The Northwest Community College field saw more rugby action as the Terrace Northmen and Smithers Camels played yesterday. The Northmen beat the Camels 32-14. Nicole Motter, First News, Terrace.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection of his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.